Well, this marks the anniversary of a seminal moment in the history of racial and social justice in society, the murder of George Floyd a year ago, and joined, of course, by Mark Fraser, Player Development for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at MLSC. And Mark, it's obviously a somber anniversary, and at the same time, we've had a year to reflect and see how society has changed in some ways for the better. But when you overall think about a year ago, the murder of George Floyd, what's the first thing that jumps into your mind?
The first thing, David, I think that I go back to that I think of is the moment, obviously itself, the first time I remember seeing it, but then beyond that, it was also the response to the tragic murder. And it was not so much the pleasant response that came with a growing movement for Black Lives Matter and international peaceful protests happening all over the globe. But what was more troublesome for me is the manner in which we witnessed this loss of life, in which we saw a modern day lynching happen, and the movement that obviously was inspired from that, and then some of the outrage that came from those protests and those peaceful protests. And that was one of the most challenging things for me, going back to just about a year ago now. It was hard enough to watch, of course, the graphic footage of an individual actually losing their life. But on top of that, it was the response at times where you really thought it would be a unanimous decision that this is, inexcusable, that in fact, Black lives do matter. We're not saying all lives don't matter, but specifically right now, this is an example where the Black community is hurting. And this is a perfect example of injustices that have been happening to this demographic for a long time. And the response to that is where my mind goes, and some of the pain and emotion that I had to feel last year, and just not understanding why my society can't see our own lived experiences now that they're so prevalent and in front of us.
It's tough for those in the hockey community. We'll keep this to hockey, like yourself, visible minorities who are really impacted by these things. But it can't all fall on you or Wayne Simmons or guys like that to try and affect change. It's really got to come from the large majority pulling in the same direction. Did you feel a bit of that? I can tell you one of the best moments I can remember in the past year was the opening night of the Stanley Cup playoffs last summer, when Matt Dumba gave that beautiful and eloquent and heartfelt speech. And then I believe it was a night or two later, you had Tyler Sagan, Jason Dickinson taking a knee to show their support for Black Lives Matter and for helping change some of the problems that we see in society, but also within the game of hockey. What did that mean to you that we're starting to see this galvanization of the players, maybe understanding what's at the root of the problem here?
No, it certainly it means a lot. And I was in my backyard watching the game when Matt Dumba had the floor, and I just remember thinking, never in my life, as a former NHLer, did I envision a day where a minority hockey player was going to stand up, literally be given a platform and a microphone to say Black Lives Matter, to say we need to start addressing systemic racism. We need to start using our platform that we have here in sport and in hockey. This is not a political statement. Mm-hmm. This is simply for humanitarian and social rights. There's too many stakeholders, including Matt Dumba himself, in the game of hockey, who are represented by this community. And we can no longer be immune to these factors if they're affecting so intimately individuals who are trying to be a part of this sport and try to be a part of this game. And I just, in my experience as a hockey player, had at the pro level, had never thought I'd dream of the day. Now, perhaps unfortunately, that was a response to, again, these tragic events that happened last year on May 25th. But it was somewhat of a positive. Well, again, it definitely was a positive moment, but it was an optimistic, perhaps, sign of what was going to where we were eventually going. There's such a long road ahead still, but that's an example of seeing things change a little bit. Now, I want to see a lot more change. I want to see a lot more action to follow, and not just be like, okay, well, we did that there, like we're all done. But at the same time, a guy like Dumba having that floor before a hockey game, having Subban and Malcolm Subban and Nurse, I believe it was, standing beside him and putting that, for me, that's just such a powerful image of to see these three individuals in such an empowering Black and people of color moment for the game of hockey. That's a historic moment that I don't know it gets really as much focus as it should, but those are the types of things where I maybe didn't always need to receive these messages in the hockey community, but now that I can't express from a Black hockey player how far they go as far as the ability to empower me and strengthen me and help me find my own voice.
The optimist in me loves everything you just said. And it was really important for players like Matt Dumba to amplify this message. And there was some kinship there from other players. The pessimist in me says, Mark, we need more. The players can amplify the message all they want, but essentially it's the NHL owners that can affect change.
Absolutely.
For example, with Maple Leaf Sport and Entertainment, creating your role, hiring you, adding visible minorities, adding people who understand the struggle firsthand and can really express why these positions are needed, why on an executive level, the executive boards of all these franchises need to look like the communities that they're representing, right? And they don't currently. So what's your message right now to MLSE ownership or to other NHL ownership about how they can affect change?
That's a great question. And my message would be largely what you just said is it's time that we need to start reflecting our communities. If we want to say that hockey is a game for everyone, if we want to say that hockey is, at least specifically speaking in the country of Canada, that it's a Canadian game. Well, we're a very diverse country and we're a very diverse nation and cities. And when I go around to the malls or the schools or my church, wherever it is, it's very multicultural. But the hockey community just isn't like that. And we've never really had to pivot before, but that's no longer an excuse. And 100% needs to start at the top. We can be incredibly involved in grassroots movement, and we all should be, to influence new generations of youth to see that they in fact can be welcomed and included in this environment, that for no arbitrary restrictions, there is a spot for them to either play hockey, coach hockey, manage hockey, and the many roles and responsibilities in between. But absolutely, from leadership teams and from ownership and from board of directors, representation also starts at the top. It's really hard for any MLSE employee or any Toronto Maple Leafs staff to really envision the opportunity for growth in their careers if there isn't someone who looks like them or identifies how they identify in those senior positions. So we have to, it's not just a matter of diversifying and bringing in just a bunch of people of color and thinking we checked the box and we're okay. It's about also creating opportunities for growth. And something I use in my line of work now with the Maple Leafs on the player development side for equity, diversity, inclusion is to point out if there's a sixth defenseman, two guys on the bubble who's making the fight for that last spot, and you have a Swedish GM and there's a Swedish player and a French Canadian player, there's at times biases that'll creep in, and it's okay that you have the bias, but that Swedish GM might lean more towards the Swedish player because he's a little bit more familiar with him. That's not something that a Black hockey player or individual of color in the hockey community ever really have. There's never that bias that being who we are actually might help us in some manner. And that's something that's unfortunately incorporated, again, that's just a little bit of a detriment to the system that's in place right now. So my message to the leadership would be, we need to not only diversify at all bottom levels or non-senior levels, but at the same in our ownership and in our board of governors as well, because board of directors, just because it's that representation is such a crucial piece to actually creating a welcoming and inclusive, and then from the top down, having a new perspective of how we can make this a more equitable environment for all.
We only have a couple of minutes left, Mark, but I did want to touch on the players' platform. It's so funny when I think back to Colin Kaepernick putting a knee down, and then there was this, a narrative of stick to sports, and there was this idea that, his patriotism was being challenged. It was conflating the real issues where he was fighting essentially for social and racial justice, and this was his way of using his platform. You didn't have this platform ability as a player, but now the players seem to have the ability to go out and speak their minds. What would you ideally like to see? And we know it has to be at the ownership level that things actually get changed, but what would you like to see the players collectively as a group use their platform to do in the next year?
I would love to see players and my peers, my white hockey players and allies, to use the platform. They have to not only show that they're growing in their own awareness and education. I guess it starts with having to grow in your own awareness and education, but then use their platforms to encourage others to do it as well. A few post George Floyd's murder and during last summer's Black Lives Matter movement, there's a handful of players who actually said something that actually resonated with me. And that was, Blake Wheeler's and Connor Carrick's and Ben Scribbins. Wheeler, I believe, he posted something and he said, these are actually some charities where he and his wife are actually contributing to. So I encourage all of you to do the same. We're not just saying these things are wrong and then not taking action to follow it. One of the best things that I've learned, and I didn't sometimes, again, I said, know that I needed these messages or maybe didn't need them at the time, but the action of a guy like John Tavares choosing to run a player-led thing, not a team-led thing, but to wear Black Lives Matter t-shirts when the return to play happened last year, spoke to me in such a way that I truly believe it contributed to me obviously reaching out to speak to the management and encouraging them to start looking in the diversity and inclusion world and space. And 8 months later, I'm back with the Leafs filling that exact role. But for me, and having that ability and that comfort and confidence to reach out in the first place and encourage this amazing organization to try to be leaders here came from my colleagues like John Tavares with the simplest message of wearing a t-shirt with those 3 words on it. So what I would love to see from my peers is continue to use your platform. You don't have to say something every week or every day. And and it's a sticky or sometimes a scary conversation, but to understand the way Eric Branson understood when these things happen, this could be my friend. This could be my teammate it's happening to. And I can guarantee you, to your point, David, every minority hockey player has at some point has been a victim of racism, not just in the streets, but also in the game of hockey. And so when I walk out of the locker room and my peers are still Toronto Maple Leafs and they get to go to lunch and go get groceries and be treated like celebrities still, that's not always the case for individuals who look like us. We don't have the Maple Leaf brand to protect us anymore. And I've had countless experiences of that happening to me during my career. So for that reason, I need my peers and athletes in hockey to understand that not all athletes are protected by the shield and we're not all protected by the logo. And when we leave this building, sometimes we're just thrown right back into society as a minority that comes with now a lot of bias and a lot of prejudice at times directed towards us. So to have that growth and awareness, to be comfortable now, to use your platform because the masses will listen. It's not political. You are speaking solely on humanitarian and social rights in honor of your brothers and sisters who are trying to be a part of this beautiful game, who are trying to just have amazing opportunities in life that you and I both benefited from. But at times it comes with the challenges and it has nothing to do with our ability, but solely because of the color of our skin. And those are things that our colleagues need to be, I hope at least my colleagues continue to grow more awareness in so that they don't have to have that same type of fear of who's going to push back, because there's always going to be critics, there's always going to be haters, but those are the people we're trying to honestly leave behind. So we're trying to go in a whole different direction right now with growth and awareness and culture in our game, and to feel the courage to do so, because without the majority speaking up, things just won't get better for the minorities.
Mark, incredible messaging. And listen, we all wish you nothing but luck in your new role, an important role, a role that should be really integrated into every single sport franchise we see, not just in hockey, but in all the big professional sports. So keep fighting the good fight. And thanks for this great conversation, Mark.
I appreciate it so much, David. Thank you for your time as always.